They called her a gold digger. They called her worthless. In a crowded Manhattan courtroom, everyone from the judge to her own ex-husband laughed when she claimed she didn't need his money. They thought they were watching the humiliation of a desperate, penniless woman, but they didn't know that the timid housewife standing before them was actually the silent owner of the very building they were standing in. They didn't know that with one phone call, she could end their careers. Get ready for the most satisfying revenge story of the year, because when the truth comes out, the silence in that courtroom will be deafening. The sound of the gavel hitting the mahogany block felt like a physical blow to Eliza's chest. "Order! I will have order in this court," Judge Harrison bellowed, though the smirk playing on his lips betrayed his amusement. The courtroom was buzzing, filled with the murmurs of Manhattan's elite, reporters hungry for scandal, and the legal sharks who circled them. They were all looking at Eliza Vance, or, as the tabloids had branded her, the weeping willow of Wall Street. She stood alone at the defendant's table. Her attorney, a court-appointed public defender named Mr. Henderson, was currently shuffling through a stack of disorganized papers, looking as though he'd rather be anywhere else. He smelled faintly of stale coffee and defeat. Across the aisle sat her husband, soon-to-be ex-husband, Richard Sterling. Richard looked magnificent, in the way a predator looks magnificent right before it tears into its prey. He was wearing a bespoke charcoal suit from Savile Row, his hair perfectly coiffed, his posture radiating the arrogance of a man whose net worth hovered in the 9 figures. Beside him sat his legal team, a phalanx of 3 high-powered attorneys from the firm Sterling & Associates, led by the infamous divorce shark, Martin Thorne. "Mrs. Sterling," the judge said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Or should I say, Ms. Vance, your husband's counsel has presented a very generous settlement offer. A one-time payment of $50,000. Given that you signed a prenuptial agreement stating you would leave the marriage with exactly what you entered it with, which, according to records, was nothing, I suggest you take it." Laughter rippled through the gallery. Eliza kept her head down, her hands trembling slightly on the table. She wore a simple, off-the-rack gray dress that had seen better days. To everyone in the room, she looked exactly like what Richard said she was, a small-town girl who had gotten lucky, trapped a billionaire, and was now being discarded because she was too boring, too plain, too ordinary. "Your Honor," Martin Thorne stood up, smoothing his silk tie. "My client, Mr. Sterling, is merely trying to be charitable. We all know Ms. Vance has no employable skills. She hasn't worked a day in the 5 years of this marriage. She spent her time, what was it, Richard, gardening?" Richard chuckled darkly, leaning into the microphone. "She called it gardening, Martin. I called it playing in the dirt while the adults did business." More laughter. Eliza felt her face burn. They didn't know. None of them knew. "I object," Mr. Henderson mumbled half-heartedly. "Overruled." The judge snapped before Henderson could even finish the sentence. "Ms. Vance, do you have anything to say before I finalize this judgment? And please, spare us the tears. The court is on a schedule." Eliza took a deep breath. She raised her head. For the first time all morning, she looked Richard directly in the eyes. Her eyes weren't wet. They were cold. Hard. "I don't want the 50,000, Eliza said softly. "Speak up," the judge barked. Eliza straightened her back. "I said, I don't want his $50,000, and I don't want alimony." The courtroom went silent for a heartbeat, then confused whispering broke out. Richard raised an eyebrow, leaning over to whisper to Martin Thorne. "She's bluffing," Richard whispered loud enough for the front row to hear. "She's trying to play the martyr. She'll be begging on the street in a week." "Ms. Vance," the judge sighed, taking off his glasses and rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Let me be clear. If you refuse this settlement, you get nothing. You walk out of here with the clothes on your back. Is that what you want?" "I want a divorce," Eliza said clearly, "and I want my maiden name back. That is all." Richard laughed out loud. It was a cruel, barking sound. "Let her have it, Judge. If she wants to starve to keep her dignity, let her. She's worthless anyway. Just a leech I finally managed to scrape off my shoe." Eliza's gaze shifted to the woman sitting in the gallery, directly behind Richard. It was Jessica, Richard's personal assistant, and his mistress for the last 2 years. Jessica was wearing a diamond necklace that Eliza recognized. It was a family heirloom from Richard's grandmother, a piece Eliza had been told was too valuable to wear out. Jessica smirked and waved her fingers at Eliza. The betrayal didn't sting anymore. It had burned away weeks ago, replaced by a cold resolve. "Very well." Judge Harrison slammed the gavel down. "Judgment is entered. The marriage is dissolved. No alimony. No settlement. Case closed. Ms. Vance, I suggest you find a homeless shelter before nightfall. The weather is turning." Richard stood up, buttoning his jacket. He turned to Eliza, walking over to her table with a swagger. He leaned in close, invading her personal space. "You are always pathetic, Eliza," he hissed. "You had a golden ticket, and you were too stupid to cash it in. Go back to Idaho. Go back to being nobody." "Goodbye, Richard," Eliza said calmly. He sneered and turned away, linking arms with Jessica as the press swarmed him. "Mr. Sterling! Mr. Sterling! How does it feel to be a free man?" "It feels expensive, but worth every penny," Richard joked for the cameras. Eliza gathered her meager folder of papers. Mr. Henderson was already packing his briefcase. "Tough break, kid," the public defender said, not looking at her. "But you really should have taken the 50 grand. "I don't need his money, Mr. Henderson," Eliza said. Sure, everyone needs money." Eliza walked out of the courtroom. The heavy oak doors closed behind her, muffling the noise of the circus inside. She walked down the marble hallway of the courthouse, her heels clicking rhythmically. She reached the elevator bank and pressed the down button. When the doors opened, she stepped inside, but instead of pressing the button for the lobby, she pulled a sleek, black phone from her purse, a device far more expensive than the one she had used in court. She dialed a number. "Status," a deep voice answered on the other end. "It's done," Eliza said. Her voice had changed. The timidity was gone, replaced by a tone of absolute command. "The divorce is final. I am legally single." "Did he sign the waiver?" the voice asked. "He did. He waived all rights to any assets I might possess, present or future, in exchange for me waiving rights to his. He thinks he won." "He has no idea," the voice chuckled. "The board is waiting for you, Ms. Vance. Or should I say, chairwoman?" "I'll be there in 20 minutes, Liam. Send the car around to the back exit. I don't want the press to see me getting into a phantom just yet." "Understood. And Eliza?" "Yes?" "The acquisition of Sterling Industries. Debt. Are we proceeding?" Eliza watched the floor numbers tick down. A small, dangerous smile touched her lips. "Proceed immediately. Buy it all. Every bond, every loan, every outstanding credit line. By the time Richard wakes up tomorrow, I want to own his company's debt." "With pleasure." The elevator doors opened to the basement garage. Waiting there, amidst the dusty sedans of court clerks, was a gleaming, midnight blue Rolls-Royce Phantom. A driver in a pristine uniform stood by the open door. "Welcome back, ma'am," the driver said, bowing his head. Eliza slid into the leather interior, the scent of luxury wrapping around her. She pulled a tablet from the seat pocket and tapped the screen. It displayed a live stock ticker. STI, Sterling Industries, $45.20 trending down. "Drive," Eliza said. "We have a hostile takeover to manage." 3 years earlier, nobody would have guessed that Eliza Vance was anything more than a quiet library volunteer from a dusty town in Idaho. When she met Richard Sterling at a charity gala she had practically gate-crashed with a friend, she had been wearing a rented dress. Richard had been charmed by her innocence. He liked that she didn't know who he was. He liked that she was simple. He wanted a trophy wife who wouldn't ask questions about his late nights or his offshore accounts. What Richard didn't know, what nobody knew, was Eliza's lineage. Eliza was the sole granddaughter of Elias Thorne, no relation to the lawyer, a reclusive mining magnate who had died 5 years prior. Elias had hated publicity. He believed that wealth was a target on your back. He had raised Eliza to be invisible. He taught her how to read a balance sheet before she could read a novel. He taught her that the most dangerous person in the room is the one nobody notices. When Elias died, he left Eliza everything. A fortune worth billions, tied up in a complex web of holding companies, trusts, and real estate LLCs, all managed by a firm called Vanguard Holdings. Eliza was the silent owner of Vanguard. She had married Richard because she genuinely loved him. At the time, she wanted a normal life. She wanted to be loved for herself, not her grandfather's money. So she kept the secret. She played the role of the housewife. She helped Richard with his business problems over dinner, giving him advice that he thought was just lucky intuition. "Maybe you should invest in lithium, Richard," she would say while passing the potatoes. He would laugh, pat her head, and say, "Stick to cooking, darling." But then he'd do it, make millions, and claim it was his genius. But the love had faded as Richard's ego grew. The verbal abuse started. Then the infidelity. When he filed for divorce, claiming she was a burden, Eliza decided the test was over. She had failed to find true love, but she wouldn't fail at revenge. Currently, inside the Rolls-Royce, Eliza was changing. She pulled off the drab gray dress to reveal a tailored black power suit she had worn underneath. She wiped off the pale makeup that made her look tired, applying a bold red lipstick. She tied her hair back into a severe, sleek bun. The weeping willow was gone. The iron orchid was back. The car pulled up to a glass skyscraper in Midtown Manhattan, the Apex Tower. "Wait here, James," she told the driver. Eliza walked into the lobby. The security guards, who usually ignored the mousy woman who sometimes visited the building's cafe, snapped to attention. "Good afternoon, Ms. Vance," the head of security said, rushing to open the turnstile. "Afternoon, Frank. Is the boardroom prepped?" "Yes, ma'am. They are all waiting." Eliza took the private elevator to the 90th floor. This building wasn't just any building. It was the headquarters of Vanguard Holdings. And ironically, it was also the building where Richard rented 3 floors for Sterling Industries. He was her tenant. And his lease was up for renewal next month. The elevator doors opened directly into a conference room that commanded a panoramic view of the city. 12 people sat around a long table, men and women in expensive suits who ran the global operations of her empire. When Eliza entered, they all stood up. "Sit," she commanded, taking the seat at the head of the table. Liam, her chief operating officer, a handsome man with sharp eyes and absolute loyalty, slid a dossier toward her. "The court proceedings went as expected?" Liam asked. "Better," Eliza said, flipping open the file. He was arrogant. He didn't even read the final clause of the divorce decree carefully. "The clean break clause?" "Exactly," Eliza smiled. "It states that neither party can claim ownership of assets acquired after the precise minute the gavel fell, which was approximately 10:15 a.m. today." She looked at her watch. "It is now 11 a.m. What is the status of the debt purchase?" "Executed at 10:45 a.m., Liam confirmed. "Through our shell companies, Vanguard now holds 60% of Sterling Industries' operational debt. The bank was happy to offload it. They'd been worried about Richard's reckless spending on his new yacht." "Excellent. And the lease?" "The notification was sent to his office 5 minutes ago. A woman from the legal department said, 'We are invoking the owner's usage clause. We are not renewing his lease. He has 30 days to vacate the premises.'" Eliza leaned back. He's going to panic. His entire server infrastructure is hardwired into this building. Moving in 30 days will cost him millions in downtime. He's already calling the landlord's office screaming. Liam checked his phone. The property manager is redirecting him to the new owner representative. "Who is the representative?" Eliza asked. "You are," Liam grinned. "Good. Set up a meeting for tomorrow morning. Tell him the new owner of the building wants to discuss his eviction personally. He thinks the owner is an elderly man named Mr. Blackwood," Liam noted. Mr. Blackwood was actually Eliza's cat. "Let him think that. Tomorrow, Richard Sterling is going to learn that the world is very small and karma is very big." The next morning, Richard Sterling was in a foul mood. The victory in court yesterday had been sweet, but today was a disaster. First, His bank manager called to say his credit line was frozen because his debt had been sold to a mysterious private equity firm. Then he received an eviction notice for his headquarters. "Who the hell buys a skyscraper and evicts the anchor tenant?" Richard screamed at Jessica, throwing a vase across his office. "They said the new owner wants to use the floors for their own expansion," Jessica stammered, picking up the pieces. "They agreed to a meeting at 10 a.m. in the penthouse suite." "I'll sue them," Richard growled. "I'll sue them into the ground. Get Martin on the phone." "Martin isn't answering, Richard. He says he has a conflict of interest now." "What conflict? I pay him." Just go to the meeting, Richard. Maybe you can bribe them." Richard adjusted his tie, checking his reflection. He looked tired, but he still had that air of invincibility. He was Richard Sterling. He could talk his way out of anything. He took the elevator up to the 90th floor, the penthouse levels he had never been invited to. The doors opened into a sleek, minimalist lobby, branded with the Vanguard Holdings logo. A receptionist looked up. "Mr. Sterling, the chairwoman is waiting for you in the boardroom." "Chairwoman?" Richard sneered. "I thought it was a Mr. Blackwood." "Mr. Blackwood is currently unavailable. He's napping." Richard stormed past her and pushed open the heavy double doors of the boardroom. The room was dimly lit, the blinds drawn against the morning sun. At the far end of the long table, a figure sat in a high-backed leather chair, facing away from him, looking out at the view through a crack in the blinds. "Look," Richard started, his voice booming. "I don't know who you think you are, but you can't just evict Sterling Industries. I have a lease." "Your lease expired yesterday," a voice said. It was a woman's voice. Cool, controlled, familiar. Richard paused. "I want an extension. I'm willing to pay double the rent for the next 6 months." The chair slowly swiveled around. Richard froze. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Eliza sat there. She was wearing a white suit that cost more than his car. Diamonds glittered at her throat. Real ones, massive and flawless. Her hair was perfect. Her eyes were sharp as flint. "Hello, Richard," she said, interlacing her fingers. "I'm afraid your credit isn't good enough for an extension." "Eliza?" Richard whispered, his brain struggling to process the image. What are you doing here? Did you break in?" "Security." "Security works for me, Richard," she said calmly. "Just like this building belongs to me, just like your debt belongs to me." You're crazy. You're a broke housewife." Eliza tossed a file folder down the long table. It slid perfectly, stopping right at the edge where Richard stood. "Open it." Richard opened the folder with shaking hands. It was the deed to the building and the debt purchase agreement. Signed by Eliza V. Thorne, CEO of Vanguard Holdings. "Thorne?" Richard looked up, pale as a sheet. "Thorne? Like Ilias Thorne?" "My grandfather," Eliza said. "I believe you called him a doddering old fool once when reading about him in Forbes. That doddering old fool left me everything." You're a billionaire?" "Multi," she corrected, "and as of yesterday you are my investment's biggest liability." Richard collapsed into the nearest chair. The realization hit him like a freight train. He hadn't just divorced his wife. He had divorced the only person who could save him. "Eliza," he stammered, a desperate smile forming on his face. "Honey, look, yesterday in court, that was just legal posturing. You know I love you. We can fix this. We can—" "Stop," Eliza cut him off. "There is no we. You made that very clear. You wanted a clean break. You wanted me to be a nobody." She stood up and walked toward him. He shrank back in his chair. "I have a proposition for you, Richard," she said, looking down at him. "Anything," he said. "Anything. I won't evict you immediately, and I won't call in your debt today." "Thank you, Eliza. I knew you still cared." "Under one condition," she interrupted. "You have to work for it." "Work? My janitorial staff is understaffed. The 40th floor bathrooms are a mess. If you want to keep your company in this building, you will clean them, personally, every night for a month." Richard's face went purple. "You can't be serious. I am a CEO, and I am your landlord. Take the deal or get out." Eliza pressed a button on the intercom. "Liam, show Mr. Sterling to the janitor's closet. He needs a mop." The smell of industrial lemon disinfectant was something Richard Sterling had never smelled up close. He was used to the scent of aged scotch, leather, and Jessica's overly expensive perfume. Now, at 11:30 p.m. on a Tuesday, he was intimately acquainted with the smell of the men's restroom on the 40th floor. He wore a blue jumpsuit that was 2 sizes too small, straining against his shoulders. Eliza had insisted on it. "Uniformity is key to company culture," she had said, her voice devoid of irony. Richard dipped the mop into the gray water, his hands, usually adorned with a Patek Philippe watch, now wearing yellow rubber gloves. He squeezed the mop handle, imagining it was Eliza's neck. "This is temporary," he muttered to himself, the echo bouncing off the tiled walls. "Just a month. I can do this. I'll regain control, leverage a buyout, and crush her." The door to the restroom creaked open. Richard froze, turning his back to the door, scrubbing furiously at a non-existent spot on the wall. He prayed it was just another janitor. "Excuse me," a deep voice said. "Is this restroom in service?" Richard recognized the voice. His blood ran cold. It was Carter Banks, the CEO of Banks Logistics, one of Richard's biggest rivals, and a man Richard had publicly insulted at the Davos summit last year. Richard pulled his cap down lower, hunching his shoulders. "Cleaning," he grunted, trying to disguise his voice. "Closed." All right, Carter laughed. "Just needed to wash my hands. Late meeting with the new building owners. Impressive woman, that Miss Vance." Richard flinched. Carter walked to the sink anyway. Richard kept his back turned, sweating profusely. "You know," Carter said, pumping soap, "you have a similar build to a guy the first know. Richard Sterling. Ever heard of him?" Richard didn't answer. He aggressively dunked the mop. "Guy's a total fraud," Carter continued, rinsing his hands. "Heard he lost his shirt in the divorce. And now his company is tanking. Rumor has it Vanguard is going to strip Sterling Industries for parts. Couldn't happen to a nicer guy." Carter reached for a paper towel, drying his hands while staring at Richard's back. He paused. He squinted. "Hey," Carter said, stepping closer. "Buddy, you okay?" Richard couldn't take it anymore. The humiliation was a physical weight. He spun around, brandishing the mop like a weapon. "Get out!" "I said the bathroom is closed, Carter." Silence stretched between them, heavy and thick. Carter's eyes went wide. His jaw literally dropped. "Richard?" Carter whispered. Then, a slow, disbelief-fueled grin spread across his face. "Richard Sterling? Is that? Are you wearing a janitor's uniform?" It's a method acting exercise." Richard blurted out, the lie tasting like ash. For a leadership seminar? Humility training?" Carter pulled out his phone. "Oh, this is rich. This is the richest thing I've ever seen. Humility training?" "Richard, you're scrubbing a toilet." "Don't you dare!" Richard lunged, but he slipped on the wet floor, crashing down hard onto the tiles. The bucket tipped over, soaking his legs in dirty water. Click! Flash. Carter took a photo. Then he started recording. "Ladies and gentlemen of LinkedIn," Carter narrated to his phone camera, panning down to Richard, who was sprawling in the suds. "You are not going to believe who is handling the sanitation at the Apex Tower tonight. The Wolf of Wall Street seems to have become the janitor of Main Street." "Delete that!" Richard screamed, scrambling to his feet, dripping wet. "I'll sue you. I'll destroy you." "You can't even destroy a stain, Richard," Carter laughed, backing out of the door. "See you around, buddy. You missed a spot." The door swung shut. Richard stood alone in the puddle, his chest heaving. He knew, with a sinking dread, that by morning, his life as a respected CEO was effectively over. Eliza Vance sat in her penthouse office, sipping a cup of chamomile tea. It was 7 a.m. On the massive 80-inch screen on her wall, the morning news was playing. The headline banner read, "Dirty Laundry. Billionaire CEO spotted cleaning toilets." The video Carter had taken had gone viral instantly. It was everywhere. TikTok, Twitter, Instagram. The hashtag janitorich was trending globally. People were remixing it with sad music. Memes were being generated by the second. Eliza watched Richard slip and fall in the video. She didn't smile. She didn't laugh. She just watched with clinical detachment. "Brutal," Liam said, standing beside her with a tablet. Sterling Industries stock is down another 14% in pre-market trading. The board of directors is calling for an emergency vote of no confidence. "Let it drop a bit more," Eliza said calmly. "I want to buy the shares when they hit single digits." "You're going to buy his company?" "I built that company, Liam," Eliza said, turning to him. "Richard was the face, but I did the strategy. I wrote the business plans. I found the investors. I want it back, but I want it cheap." The intercom buzzed. "Miss Vance? A Miss Jessica Miller is here to see you. She says it's urgent." Eliza raised an eyebrow. "The mistress. Send her in." A moment later, Jessica walked in. She looked nothing like the smug woman in the courtroom. Her hair was messy, her eyes were red-rimmed, and she was clutching a designer handbag like a lifeline. She stopped when she saw Eliza. The grandeur of the office, the art, the view, the sheer power radiating from the room seemed to shrink Jessica down. "Eliza," Jessica started, her voice shaking. "Miss Vance," Eliza corrected. "You aren't my friend, Jessica. You're the woman who slept with my husband in my bed. State your business." Jessica swallowed hard. I have information about Richard. I know everything about Richard. I know his bank codes. I know his allergies. I know he snores when he's stressed. What could you possibly tell me?" "I know where he hid the Cayman accounts," Jessica blurted out. The room went silent. Liam looked up from his tablet. "Go on," Eliza said, leaning forward slightly. "He didn't declare them in the divorce assets," Jessica said, stepping closer. "There's about $10 million stashed in a shell company called Blue Horizon. He was planning to use it to restart if things went south. He told me about it when he was drunk last week." "And why are you telling me this?" Eliza asked. "Aren't you his soulmate?" "He fired me this morning," Jessica cried, tears spilling over. "He blamed me for the video. He said I distracted him. He kicked me out of the apartment." "Eliza, please, if I give you the account numbers, will you help me?" "I have nothing. He made me quit my modeling job." Eliza looked at the woman. 2 days ago she would have felt pity. Now she saw a rat jumping from a sinking ship. "You want a payout?" Eliza concluded. "Just a finder's fee. 10%? Eliza stood up and walked to the window. "You helped him hide assets during a divorce proceeding. That is a felony, Jessica." "If I use that information, I become complicit." She turned back. "However, if you were to go to the FBI with this information, you might get a reduced sentence and a whistleblower reward." Jessica went pale. "Jail?" "Richard committed perjury," Eliza said coldly, "and you conspired with him. My advice? Run to the district attorney before Richard does. Because when I'm done with him, he's going to be looking for someone to blame, and you are the perfect scapegoat." Jessica stared at her, horrified. Then, realizing the truth of Eliza's words, she turned and ran out of the office. "She's going straight to the cops," Liam observed. "Good," Eliza said. "That freezes the Cayman money. Richard is now completely liquid-free. You play 4D chess, don't you?" "I learned from the best." Eliza touched the locket around her neck, a picture of her grandfather. "Now, set up the press conference. It's time I introduce myself to the world properly and invite Richard. I want him in the front row." Richard was currently in a cheap motel room in Queens. He couldn't go back to the penthouse. The locks had been changed by the landlord, Eliza, and his cards were declined. He was watching the news on a grainy TV set. Breaking news. Sterling Industries under federal investigation for hidden assets. "Jessica," Richard hissed, throwing the remote at the wall. "That traitorous little witch!" He paced the small, stained carpet. He was cornered. He was broke. He was a laughingstock. But he wasn't dead yet. He reached into his duffel bag and pulled out an old burner phone. There was one person he hadn't called yet, a man named Silas. Silas wasn't a lawyer. He wasn't a banker. Silas was a fixer for the kind of problems that couldn't be solved legally. Richard had used him once, years ago, to intimidate a union leader who was threatening a strike. He dialed the number. "Yeah?" a gravelly voice answered. "Silas, it's Sterling." "I saw the video, Richie. Nice jumpsuit. You looking for a job? I need a toilet scrubbed." "Shut up," Richard snapped. "I have a job for you. A big one. 50,000. Cash." "You don't have 50 cents, Richie." "I have a stash of watches. Rolexes, Patek. Worth 200 grand easy. They're in a safety deposit box in Jersey. I'll give you the key. But I need you to do something for me tonight." "I'm listening." "Eliza Vance. She's holding a press conference tomorrow at the Apex Tower. I need her discredited. Permanently." "You want me to clip her?" Silas asked, his tone dropping. No, nothing like that." Richard wiped sweat from his forehead. "I'm not a murderer. I want dirt. Or if there isn't dirt, I want you to plant it." "Plant what?" "Drugs, embezzlement files, anything." "Get into her office tonight. Plant evidence that she's been laundering money for the cartels or something. I'll call the feds anonymously in the morning. If she gets arrested, the stock freezes, the hostile takeover stops, and I have time to maneuver." "Risky," Silas mused. "Entering the Apex Tower? That place is a fortress." "She's new. She probably hasn't updated the security protocols yet. I still have my old master key card. I swiped it before they kicked me out. It might still work on the service elevator. If the key works, I'm in. If not, I walk. Just do it, Silas. Ruin her." That night, the Apex Tower was silent, save for the hum of the servers and the wind against the glass. Eliza was still in her office. She rarely slept these days. She was reviewing the acquisition papers for Sterling Industries. She was one signature away from owning everything Richard had ever built. Suddenly, the lights in her office flickered. She looked up. The security monitor on her desk blinked off, then rebooted. "Liam?" She spoke into the intercom. No answer. A sense of unease pricked at her neck. Her grandfather had taught her to trust her instincts. When the woods go quiet, the wolf is near. She opened her desk drawer and pulled out a small panic button, but before she could press it, the office door hissed open. A man dressed in black maintenance gear walked in. He wore a cap pulled low and a mask. It was Silas. Eliza didn't scream. She stayed seated. "You aren't the night cleaning crew," she said steadily. Silas paused, surprised by her calm. He locked the door behind him. "Smart lady, don't reach for the phone." "Who sent you?" Eliza asked. "Richard?" "Does it matter?" Silas walked over to the bookshelf, pulling a bag of white powder from his pocket. He began tucking it behind a row of law books. "Nothing personal, lady. Just business. By tomorrow, the cops find this, and you're trading that suit for an orange jumpsuit." "Cocaine?" Eliza scoffed. "How cliché. Richard really has no imagination." "It gets the job done." "You know," Eliza said, standing up slowly, "you're making a mistake." "Sit down!" Silas barked, reaching into his jacket, implying a weapon. "The mistake isn't threatening me," Eliza said, walking around her desk. "The mistake is thinking Richard Sterling can pay you." Silas froze. "He told you about a safety deposit box in Jersey, didn't he? Watches?" Eliza guessed. Silas narrowed his eyes. "How did you?" "Because I paid the rental fee on that box for 5 years, Eliza said, "and I stopped paying it 3 months ago. The bank drilled the lock last week for non-payment. The contents were auctioned off yesterday." Silas stood still. The bag of drugs was half hidden on the shelf. "So," Eliza continued, leaning against her desk, "Richard sent you on a suicide mission for a payment that doesn't exist. You're going to go to jail for breaking and entering, and you won't see a dime." Silas cursed under his breath. "However," Eliza said, her voice dropping to a smooth, businesslike tone, "I am hiring." Silas looked at her. "What?" "I need a head of security. My current one is slow. You bypassed my perimeter in 4 minutes. That's impressive. I pay in cash, wire transfer, or crypto. And unlike Richard, I actually have the money." Silas hesitated. He looked at the drugs. He looked at Eliza. "How much?" "Triple whatever Richard promised, and a full benefits package." Silas slowly pulled the bag of drugs back out from the bookshelf. He pocketed it. He pulled off his mask, revealing a scarred, rugged face. "When do I start?" "Right now," Eliza said. "I want you to deliver a message to Richard, but not a verbal one." The next morning, the press conference hall at the Apex Tower was packed. Every major news network was there. The buzz was electric. The mysterious owner of Vanguard Holdings was finally revealing herself. Richard Sterling was there, standing in the back. He had snuck in, wearing a hat and sunglasses. He was waiting for the police to arrive. He was waiting for the sirens. He was checking his watch, wondering why Silas hadn't texted him, "Done." The lights dimmed. A spotlight hit the stage. Eliza walked out. She looked radiant, powerful, unstoppable. She stood at the podium, surveying the room. "Good morning," she said. "I am Eliza Thorne Vance, chairwoman of Vanguard Holdings." Flashbulbs erupted like a lightning storm. "For years," Eliza began, "I stood in the shadow of a man who believed power was a birthright, not a responsibility. I watched as greed corrupted innovation. Today, that ends." She gestured to the screen behind her. "I am pleased to announce that Vanguard Holdings has officially acquired 51% of Sterling Industries. As majority shareholder, my first act is to dissolve the current board of directors." Richard gasped in the back of the room. It was happening. She was eating him alive. "Furthermore," Eliza continued, "we have uncovered systemic embezzlement and fraud within the former leadership." She clicked a remote. A video played on the massive screen behind her. It wasn't a spreadsheet. It was a security camera footage from last night. It showed Richard Sterling in the motel room, holding the phone. The audio was crystal clear, enhanced by technology. "I want you to plant it. Drugs, embezzlement files. Anything. If she gets arrested, the stock freezes." The room gasped. Reporters turned to each other in shock. Richard froze. His heart stopped. How? Then the video cut to Silas, standing in Eliza's office, looking directly at the camera. "Mr. Sterling offered me non-existent jewelry to frame his ex-wife," Silas said on screen. "I decided I prefer a steady paycheck." Richard turned to run. But as he turned, he bumped into a wall of a man. He looked up. It was Silas, wearing a Vanguard security blazer. "Going somewhere, Richie?" Silas grinned. Beside Silas stood 2 FBI agents. "Richard Sterling," the agent said, holding up a badge. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, solicitation of a crime, and perjury. You have the right to remain silent." The cameras swiveled. The spotlight moved from Eliza to the back of the room. Richard was handcuffed. His hat fell off. He looked wild, desperate, and utterly defeated. "Eliza!" he screamed as they dragged him out. "Eliza, you can't do this. I made you. I'm the victim here." Eliza didn't even look at him. She looked at the camera. "As I was saying," Eliza continued smoothly, addressing the press, "we are ushering in a new era of transparency. The Sterling name will be removed from all buildings effective immediately. We will be rebranding as Thorne Enterprises." The room erupted in applause. It wasn't just polite clapping. It was a standing ovation. They loved a winner, and they loved seeing a tyrant fall. The changing of the guard did not happen quietly. It happened with the roar of jackhammers and the screech of metal. 6 months had passed since the arrest of Richard Sterling, an event the financial tabloids had dubbed the Sterling Crash. On a crisp autumn morning, Eliza Vance stood on the sidewalk of Fifth Avenue, watching a massive crane lower the gold-plated S from the top of the Apex Tower. It spun slowly in the wind, a tarnished symbol of a reign built on arrogance and fraud, before disappearing into a scrap dumpster. Eliza adjusted her sunglasses. She didn't feel glee. She felt a profound sense of cleaning. It was like scrubbing the grime off a beautiful painting to reveal the masterpiece underneath. "The new signage goes up this afternoon, Ms. Vance," Liam said, standing beside her with a tablet in hand. He had transitioned from COO to her right-hand man and closest confidant. "The Thorne Enterprises logo. Simple, understated, platinum finish. Just as you requested." "Good," Eliza said, turning away from the construction. "Richard always liked things loud. I prefer them permanent." She walked into the lobby, her heels clicking on the marble with a rhythm that commanded attention. the atmosphere inside the building had transformed. Under Richard's rule, the employees had walked with their heads down, terrified of his temper tantrums. Now, there was a hum of productivity. People greeted her, not with fear, but with genuine respect. They knew she was the one who had saved their pensions when the feds came knocking. Eliza took the private elevator up to the penthouse. Her office had been completely gutted. Gone were the dark mahogany panels, the taxidermy hunting trophies, and the smell of stale cigars. The space was now an open-concept sanctuary of light, filled with cream-colored furniture, modern art, and a wall of living orchids. Silas, her head of security, was waiting by the door. The former rough-edged fixer had cleaned up nicely. He wore a tailored suit that fit his broad frame, his earpiece the only sign of his profession. He had proven to be as loyal as a bloodhound. "The car is ready for the 2 p.m. appointment, ma'am," Silas said, his voice low. Eliza paused while reviewing a stack of acquisition files. She felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. "Thank you, Silas. Have the legal team prep the final documents. I don't want any mistakes." "There won't be," Silas assured her. "He has no leverage left." The drive to the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn was gray and dreary. Rain streaked against the tinted windows of the Rolls-Royce, blurring the city lights. Eliza sat in the back, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She closed her eyes, letting the memories wash over her, not the bad ones, but the confusing ones. She remembered the day she met Richard. He had been charming, seemingly vulnerable. He had told her he wanted to build something that lasted. She had fallen in love with his ambition, not realizing that his ambition was a fire that would eventually consume everything, including her. "We're here, Ms. Vance," the driver announced. The detention center was a stark contrast to the boardroom she had just left. It smelled of floor wax, stale cafeteria food, and misery. The fluorescent lights buzzed with a headache-inducing frequency. Eliza was escorted into a private visitation room reserved for high-profile legal consultations. She sat on a metal chair, smoothing the skirt of her navy power suit. She placed a single manila folder on the stainless steel table. The door on the other side buzzed open. Richard Sterling shuffled in. The transformation was shocking. The man who used to spend $5,000 on a haircut now looked like a ghost. His hair was thinning and unkempt, his skin pallid from months without sunlight. The bright orange jumpsuit hung loosely on his frame, making him look smaller, shrunken. He wasn't the predator anymore. He was the prey. He sat down heavily, the chains on his wrists clinking against the table. He didn't look at her at first. He stared at his hands. "Hello, Richard," Eliza said, her voice steady and cool. He slowly lifted his head. His eyes were dull, rimmed with red. But when they locked onto hers, a spark of the old malice flared up. "You look expensive," Richard rasped, his voice hoarse. "Spending my money well?" "I'm spending my money, Richard," Eliza corrected him gently, "and I'm making more of it. Stock prices are up 45% since the rebrand. It turns out, investors prefer a CEO who isn't laundering money through shell companies." Richard sneered, leaning back. "You came all this way to gloat? Is that it? You want to see the great Richard Sterling in a cage?" "I don't have time to gloat. I have a company to run. I'm here to offer you a lifeline." She slid the manila folder across the table. Richard looked at it suspiciously. "What is this?" "A plea agreement," Eliza explained. "My legal team drafted it in coordination with the district attorney this morning. It's a clean offer. You plead guilty to the fraud and perjury charges. You sign over your remaining 2% equity in the company, the shares you tried to hide in your mother's name, and you publicly admit to your role in the embezzlement scheme." Richard laughed, a dry, hacking sound. "Why the hell would I do that? My lawyer says I can fight this. He says the evidence is circumstantial." "Your lawyer is a court-appointed public defender because you can't afford Martin Thorne anymore," Eliza said, cutting through his delusion. "And the evidence is not circumstantial. We have the video of you hiring Silas. We have the bank records from the Caymans. We have Jessica's testimony." At the mention of his mistress, Richard flinched. If you fight this, Eliza continued, leaning forward, her eyes hard as flint, I will personally fund the prosecution's research team. I will drag this out for 10 years. You will rot in this cell while the world forgets your name. But if you sign this, the DA agrees to a 5-year sentence. With time served and good behavior, you could be out in 3. Richard stared at the folder. His hands were trembling. You want my shares. You want total control. I already have control, Richard. I want you gone. I want the sterling name erased from my ledger completely. Richard was silent for a long time. He looked around the bleak room. I made you, he whispered, clinging to the one narrative that gave him comfort. You were nothing before me, a mousy little librarian from Idaho. I gave you a life, I gave you style, you stole my company, but you'll always know I was the genius. Eliza sighed. It was a sad, deep sound. She reached into her purse and pulled out a photocopy of an old bank transfer. She placed it on top of the folder. Do you recognize this? She asked. Richard squinted at the paper. It's a wire transfer from 7 years ago to my startup account from the Pegasus Trust. You always bragged about that, Eliza said softly. You told everyone that an anonymous angel investor saw your brilliance and gave you $1 million seed money when every bank in New York laughed in your face. Yeah, someone believed in me. It was me, Richard. The room went dead silent. The buzz of the lights seemed to get louder. What? Richard breathed. The Pegasus Trust. It was my personal trust fund from my grandfather. I authorized the transfer the week after we met. I believed in you. I invested in you before I even agreed to marry you. I didn't marry a billionaire, Richard. I made one. Richard looked as if he had been punched in the gut. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The foundation of his ego, the belief that he was a self-made titan who had dragged a poor girl along for the ride, shattered into 1,000,000 pieces. He wasn't the hero of his own story. He was just another one of Eliza Thorne's investments, and a bad one at that. You! Tears pricked his eyes. Not tears of remorse, but of ultimate humiliation. You played me for 7 years. I loved you, Eliza said, standing up. That wasn't a play, but you loved yourself enough for both of us, and that was the problem. She tapped the folder. Sign it, Richard. It's the best deal you're ever going to get. Broken, defeated, and stripped of his last illusion, Richard picked up the pen. His hand shook violently as he scrawled his signature on the line. Eliza took the folder back. She didn't look at him again. She signaled the guard. Goodbye, Richard. As the heavy metal door slammed shut behind her, Eliza took a deep breath. She felt lighter. The final shackle was broken. That evening, the Apex Tower was ablaze with light. It was the night of the Thorne Enterprises Renaissance Gala. The entire Manhattan elite had descended upon the building. The same people who had laughed at Eliza in the courtroom 6 months ago were now fighting for invitations. The ballroom was transformed into a winter garden. White silk draped the walls, and thousands of white roses filled the air with a sweet, intoxicating scent. A string quartet played softly in the corner. Eliza stood on the grand balcony overlooking the city. She wore a gown of deep emerald velvet that hugged her figure with a diamond necklace, her grandmother's, resting against her collarbone. She looked regal. She looked dangerous. Hiding from your subjects, Your Majesty? Eliza smiled without turning. She knew that voice. Just taking a moment to breathe, Liam. Liam stepped up beside her. He looked dashing in a tuxedo, holding 2 flutes of vintage champagne. He handed one to her. They are waiting for your speech, Liam said, looking out at the glittering skyline. The press is calling you the Iron Orchid now. Beautiful, but you can't crush it. I like it, Eliza admitted, taking a sip. It's better than the Weeping Willow. I never liked that name, Liam said softly. He turned to face her, his expression serious. I always saw the steel in you, Eliza. Even when you were bringing Richard coffee and fixing his mistakes, I always knew who was really running the show. Eliza looked at him, really looked at him. Liam had been there through the worst of it. He had seen her cry, seen her rage, and seen her rise. He hadn't tried to save her. He had simply handed her the sword so she could save herself. "You've been a good friend, Liam," she said, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the champagne. "I'd like to be more," Liam said, his voice vulnerable. If you're ready. I know you have an empire to run. I know you're busy." Eliza swirled her glass. She thought about the timid girl she used to be. That girl needed a protector. The woman she was now needed a partner. An equal. "I do have an empire to run," she said, a playful smile touching her lips. "I'm going to be very demanding. I work late. I have trust issues. And I own the building." Liam grinned, clinking his glass against hers. "I'm not intimidated by the landlord, Eliza. I paid my rent." Eliza laughed, a genuine, happy sound that felt foreign but wonderful. "Then let's go inside. I believe I owe you a dance." She took his arm, and they walked back toward the ballroom doors. As they entered, the room went silent. Then, applause broke out. It started as a ripple and grew into a thunderous roar. The flashes of cameras erupted like fireworks. Eliza Vance didn't shrink away. She didn't look down. She raised her head high, meeting the gaze of the city that had tried to break her. She walked to the microphone, the emerald dress flowing around her like armor. She looked at the crowd, the bankers, the lawyers, the sharks. "Thank you all for coming," she said, her voice ringing clear and strong through the hall. "We have a lot of work to do. The past is a lesson, not a life sentence. Tonight, we don't look back at what was lost. We look forward to what we will build." She raised her glass. "To the future." "To the future," the crowd echoed. Eliza took a sip, her eyes scanning the room. She spotted the empty space on the wall where Richard's portrait used to hang. It was gone. The wall was clean. She was free. The world belonged to the Iron Orchid. And she was just getting started. And that is the incredible story of Eliza Vance. It just goes to show that you should never judge a book by its cover. And you should definitely never underestimate someone just because they're quiet. Richard thought he had won because he had the loudest voice in the room, but Eliza proved that true power moves in silence. She turned her pain into power and her heartbreak into a billion-dollar empire. What do you think? Did Richard deserve a second chance? Or did he get exactly what was coming to him? And would you have forgiven him, or would you have bought his debt just like Eliza did? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of revenge, justice, and rising from the ashes, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to share this video with a friend who loves a good drama, and hit subscribe with the notification bell turned on so you never miss our next story. Thanks for watching, and remember, be careful who you step on today. They might own the building tomorrow.